Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. This video is the 5th installment of my Narnia series, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I do go through them in chronological order and not order of release, just to be clear. I would also recommend checking out the previous videos in this series, if you haven't already, that is, meaning The Magician's Nephew, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, The Horse and His Boy, and then Prince Caspian. They will all be linked down below. With all of that being said, do make yourself comfortable with a nice cup of tea or any other beverage of your choice, and let's get into The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Chapter 1. Meet Eustace. In the last book, we followed the 4 Pevensey siblings as they helped Prince Caspian claim his throne by defeating his cruel uncle Miraz, who had usurped his father's throne. And now we flash forward a year in our own world, where Edmund and Lucy are forced to go and stay with family members over the summer. And not just any family members. Meet Eustace, a bully, know-it-all, and a coward who would easily run to tell his mummy if you didn't obey him. I have a feeling we've all met a Eustace at some point during our childhood. I would have crafted a fitting description for him myself, but honestly, the book had already provided that. Eustace liked animals, especially beetles, if they were dead and pinned on a card. He liked books if they were books of information and had pictures of grain elevators or of fat foreign children doing exercise in model schools. So now I believe you have a decent idea of what kind of child Eustace is. Not the most pleasant cousin to have. And so Edmund and Lucy were forced to go and stay with him and his parents over the summer, which was about as pleasant as one could imagine. One day, Edmund and Lucy were hanging out in her room, talking about Narnia, as they should, honestly, when suddenly their cousin Eustace showed up and began teasing them about their made-up country. Now, there was a painting in this room of a ship that Lucy was admiring, saying it looked like a Narnian ship. And so, of course, Eustace took the opportunity to tell them what a rotten painting it was. Well, little did he know that the painting in question would come alive and suddenly draw them into the ocean it was depicting. And then all 3 cousins suddenly found themselves swimming in the ocean close to the Narnian ship, being rescued by a young man. The young man turned out to be Caspian, now King Caspian. Once aboard the ship, called the Dawn Treader, we meet the rest of the crew, including the brave mouse Reepicheep, whom we met in the last book. Here we learn that it has now been 3 years since the siblings helped Caspian claim his throne, and that Caspian was now on a journey searching for 7 lords that had been friends with his late father. After his uncle had usurped the throne, these lords had been sent away to prevent them from overthrowing Miraz, or at least uniting against him in some way. So now Caspian wanted to find these men, not just to find out what had happened to them since leaving Narnia, but to also get to know who these people are, who had been close friends of his father's. And Edmund, Lucy, and their cousin Eustace were now along for the ride. Chapter 2. Reclaiming the Lone Islands. Seeing as it's Eustace's first time in Narnia, he took the whole talking animals thing surprisingly well. Although he did get into a bit of a squabble with Reepicheep, the mouse, resulting in Reepicheep challenging him. "Draw your sword, poltroon," he said, and Eustace replied with, "I haven't got one, I'm a pacifist." Overall, it was a very difficult time for Eustace, as he also tells the reader in his diary entries. And don't worry, we will get to them. Soon enough, their journey took them to a cluster of islands called the Lone Islands. Lucy remembered one of these islands as being uninhabited, from a couple of thousand years ago when her and her siblings ruled Narnia, and concluded that it must still be uninhabited and thought it was time for a good long walk. So she, Edmund, Caspian, Reepicheep and Eustace went ashore with the instruction that the rest of the crew would steer the ship to the other side of the island and pick them up there. Although Eustace only really went along to make sure they contacted the British consul while they were there. And so they walked, but lo and behold, the island wasn't as deserted as expected. They actually ran into a party of slave traders and were immediately taken captive. The slave traders took them to another island close by with the intention of selling them off to Calormen. If you don't remember, Calormen is the country far to the east of Narnia that we got to explore in The Horse and His Boy. Luckily for Caspian, he was purchased immediately by a kind man who told him that Caspian reminded him of someone he had once known. Here we find out that the man in question was Lord Byrne, who was one of his father's 7 exiled friends. Caspian then revealed his identity, and Lord Byrne then took him to his estate, where they proceeded to make a plan of how to rescue the others. He explained that the governor of the island would not take kindly to a king showing up after so many years of apparent independence. And since they were also outnumbered, they had to be clever about it. Caspian told the crew of the Dawn Treader to raise a signal, as one would usually do if one had a fleet nearby that you were calling towards you. And the next day, Caspian and Lord Byrne went to the governor's castle along with the crew from the Dawn Treader. Here they made a big ruckus announcing the arrival of the king, adding to the impression of having a fleet of soldiers with them. Caspian then confronted the governor about allowing slave trade, which is prohibited according to Narnian law. Then he deposed the governor and made Lord Byrne Duke of the island in his place. The governor, thinking that Caspian had a whole fleet nearby, had no choice but to step aside. And so they went to shut down the slave market, as well as rescue Edmund, Lucy, Eustace and Reepicheep. Here we learn that Eustace had been so much of a nuisance that no one at the slave market had wanted to buy him, which might have hurt his ego a little bit. Once rescued by Caspian, Eustace complained that he probably hadn't even looked up the British consul while there. Typical. And with that, Caspian left Lord Byrne, now Duke Byrne, in the governor's castle, and the full crew of the Dawn Treader were back at sea, resuming their journey. Chapter 3: Eustace and the Dragon. The crew had smooth sailing for a few days, but then they were hit by a terrible storm. It went on for several days, causing significant damage to the ship. After this, they had the opposite problem. Severe heat and no wind left them drifting, and the water and food supply had to be strictly rationed. At one point, Eustace felt feverish, as did they all, to be frank, but he felt himself entitled to extra water and went to go and get it. But he was stopped by Reepicheep, who was guarding the water with his sword at the ready. We follow the events of this period through Eustace's diary entries, giving only his point of view. But honestly, we only need his point of view. Despite his spoiled and conceited nature, it's very clear what actually happened. For example, he makes a note about his suggestion that they just use the oars to row back to the Lone Islands. As for rowing back, it would take far too long, and Caspian says the men couldn't row on half a pint of water a day. I'm pretty sure this is wrong. I tried to explain that perspiration really cools people down, so the men would need less water if they were working. He didn't take any notice of this, which is always his way when he can't think of an answer. And then we get other delightful entries like September 4, still becalmed, very short rations for dinner, and I got less than anyone. But he did actually admit when Lucy gave some of her rationed water to him. Not in a thankful way, of course, but just to make note. Eventually, they found land, and it was a seemingly deserted island with mountains. Here they stopped, planning for a lot of work to be done. Because of the storm, the ship now needed repairs and a new mast, and they also needed to hunt for game and refill the casks with fresh water. Everyone had to help, but Eustace didn't feel like helping. What should he help for? No one had ever helped him with anything. So he slipped away quietly to find a place to rest while the others were working. He climbed one of the mountains and realized that he felt lonely and was afraid that the others would just leave him behind once they were done. He then began trying to find his way back, but that is when he got into a fog and soon found himself in a valley of sorts. Here he saw something he most definitely did not expect. It was a dragon. An old, rugged-looking dragon coming out of a nearby cave to have a drink in a pond. And then the old dragon just dropped dead. Not thinking too much of this, Eustace went to take shelter in the dragon cave as it started raining. Naturally, he found the dragon's hoard in there with lots of gold and jewels, and he put a golden bracelet on, wondering how much he would be able to carry with him. The others at the beach had by now noticed he was gone and were out looking for him, but they didn't get very far. Meanwhile, Eustace had fallen asleep in the dragon cave, and when he awoke, he felt a pain in his arm. He also realized that there was another dragon in there with him. Terrified, he ran out of the cave to the pond, where he saw his own reflection. He was the dragon, and the pain in his arm came from the bracelet he had put on before falling asleep. It was now digging into his hard dragon hide, and he couldn't get it off. Upon realizing that he had in fact been turned into a dragon, he at first thought he was mighty and fearsome, but this feeling soon died off. He didn't want to be fearsome, he wanted friends. He felt lonely and missed the others, even Reepicheep. He then used his new wings and flew down to the shore, where the others were of course frightened by his appearance. But Lucy soon realized that something was amiss. One of the crew then recognized the sign that was on the bracelet on his arm. It belonged to Lord Octesian, one of the 7 lords that Caspian was looking for. So they asked the dragon if he was Lord Octesian, to which Eustace shook his head. And when asked if he was Eustace, he nodded and started crying boiling hot tears, which gave him some sympathy, especially from Lucy. In the days that followed, everyone thought his character much improved by this transformation. Dragon Eustace was eager to help. He flew across the island, killing wild goats and swine for them. He felled a tall pine tree for their new mast. He lit fires for them, and even took a few of them flying on his back around the island. And from Eustace's perspective, he was absolutely miserable being a dragon, but the feeling of being liked by others kept the despair away somewhat. But in the evenings, he would still slip away from them, feeling like an outsider, and was then joined by none other than the mouse Reepicheep, who would tell him stories to cheer him up a bit. Even though Eustace was now less useless, the others debated on how to move forward. You see, he was too big to go on the ship with them, and they doubted he'd be able to fly without brakes for an unknown stretch of time. He of course overheard this, and all of these new experiences put together made him realize just how awful he had been before this. Then, early one morning, Edmund woke up before anyone else, seeing someone walking towards him. It took him a moment to realize who it was, but then it was unmistakable. It was Eustace, back in his human form. Eustace urged him to come with him, and when they were alone, Eustace told him the whole story, now finally being able to speak again, as well as how he was turned back. He told Edmund that a great lion had come up to him and told him to follow it, so he did. The lion had brought him to a well of some kind, with steps to help you go into it. Here the lion told Eustace to undress, which Eustace had tried to do, but his dragon hide was too thick. So then the lion had scratched him, and so the hide came off, and when he entered the water of the well, he was a boy again. Eustace then said that he realized how silly it sounds, but Edmund reassured him that the lion was none other than Aslan, a name which Eustace had heard the crew speak of before. Eustace then apologized for his previous behavior, and as the crew found that he was now turned back to normal, they could finally set back off to sea. And they never found out the fate of Lord Euctesian. Perhaps he had been a victim of the old dragon, or he was the old dragon. We will never know. Chapter 4: Goldwater and Sea Serpent. Already the next morning, their ship found another island. It didn't have much, but strangely, they found a small boat that was claimed by Reepicheep, being exactly his size. But who it once belonged to and what it was used for remained a mystery. Then they sailed on for 6 days, where Eustace lost a couple of games of chess to Reepicheep, which consequently brought out some of his old personality again. No one is perfect after all. And one day they saw something moving towards them in the water. It was a sea serpent, and it had its sights on them as its next meal. Surprisingly, Eustace was among the first to charge against their attacker, but the hard skin of the serpent only made sure to ruin his sword. So they had to do some clever maneuvering instead. When the serpent made to wrap itself around the ship, as if to break it by the middle, they managed to push the serpent's body off the stern and sailed away from it, evidently having outsmarted the sea serpent. After this, they continued sailing for 4 more days before finding the next island. It had a rather rocky terrain, and they docked here to refill their water casks. And so they walked up the rocky slope to find a stream, which is when they stumbled upon a rusty sword, some rusty gear, and coins that appeared to be Narnian in origin. Soon enough, they also found a clear lake that had a life-size statue at the bottom of it, made entirely of gold. As they tried to find out how deep it was, Edmund put his spear into the water, but soon dropped it as it became too heavy. They then realized that anything that touches this water turns into solid gold. Caspian then proclaimed that this island was now Narnian territory and was to be kept secret, although he still wanted to name it Goldwater Island, as if that wouldn't make anyone curious about visiting. Then he and Edmund started arguing, as Edmund was a king of Narnia long before Caspian, etc., etc., which led them to believe this island was cursed into making its visitors enemies. So they decided to abandon it, but before leaving, Reepicheep said it should be called Deathwater Island instead. But regardless, they all soon forgot what was special about that island anyway. The only thing they remembered when going back to the ship was that they had possibly found the body of another Narnian lord at the bottom of a lake. Chapter 5: The Invisible Island. The Dawn Treader sailed on with a steady breeze, and it went on for so long that the supplies went dangerously low again, but eventually they found land. It was an island with a large house and surprisingly well-kept grass. They docked here and began exploring in the direction of the house, despite not having seen anyone yet. Here Lucy fell behind the others somewhat, which is when she heard a strange noise. It was a thumping, and a great deal of it too. She then heard voices, but still couldn't see anyone, and the voice had said something about cutting them off from the ship before the thumping resumed. Lucy then ran ahead to the others by the house and warned them about what she had heard. So they all returned to the shore, where they were told to stop by an invisible voice that threatened violence if they didn't comply with their wishes. There were a great number of invisible voices agreeing to their leader's words, and they soon realized that they were outnumbered. So the leader of the invisible voices continued, saying that there was a magician living on this island, and that they had all worked for him. But they had disobeyed his orders, which had made him punish them by casting a spell of ugliness on them. This had caused them to be so miserable that they had set up a plot to have one of their own sneak into the magician's house when he was asleep, find his magic book, and cast a spell of invisibility so that they wouldn't have to see their ugliness anymore. And if you're thinking that they should have just cast a spell to remove the ugliness curse, they were not the smartest of people. The only problem in their plan was that by this spell, the magician had turned invisible as well. So now, even though they were still miserable being invisible, they were too afraid to go back into the house, since they wouldn't be able to see the magician in case he wanted to punish them further for their disobedience. Simply put. And here is where Lucy becomes important. You see, apart from the magician himself, the spells in his book have to be read by a young girl. They had sent one of their own young girls for the invisibility spell, but now they were too afraid to send one of their own in there, since the magician could be anywhere and they wouldn't be able to see him, and therefore needed Lucy, a stranger, to take on this dangerous task. And Lucy agreed. The invisible voices became a lot nicer after learning that she would help them, and they treated the crew to a feast that evening. And the next morning, Lucy went into the magician's house, alone, for some reason. The house was very quiet, almost too quiet. And Lucy was very nervous about a scary magician following her as she looked around to find the magic book. Eventually, she did find it, on top of a reading stand in the middle of a room full of books. She began flicking through the pages, finding all sorts of different spells, like how to change the weather, create enchanted sleep, cure a toothache, etc. And then she found a spell that caught her attention. It was a spell that would make the caster beautiful beyond all mortals. Lucy felt her jealousy of her older sister Susan, who was already very beautiful and got a lot of attention for it, seeing in her mind that Susan would pale in comparison to her if she cast this spell. But then suddenly the head of a lion appeared, the head of Aslan, and he urged her to turn the page. So she continued her flicking, finding a spell that told you what others really think of you. She read this spell without hesitation, and suddenly the images of the book showed her classmates discussing her on the train on the way to school. One of them, a girl whom she considered a friend, agreed with the other, who was quite nasty in how they spoke of Lucy. And she was very hurt by this. This clearly wasn't a true friend, and she wanted nothing more to do with her. And then the book began showing other images of people. She just turned the page, not wanting to know anymore. Eventually, she found the spell that made invisible things visible again, and she read it aloud. She knew that it had worked, as the letters of the page changed from dull to vibrant colors. And even more surprising, she found Aslan coming up behind her. He told her that he had been there the whole time, but that her spell had made him visible. She found this rather unbelievable, but he simply said, "Don't you think I would obey my own rules?" Which is very telling, reminding the reader that he is, after all, the creator of this world. He then brought Lucy to meet the magician, who was named Coriakin. He was now visible as well and greeted Lucy warmly. He told her of his workers and how they had tested his patience with their stupidity. You see, their only job was to grow food for themselves, and even this had been a difficult task. For example, they had a spring with fresh water further up, with water running down a stream, and yet they insisted on traveling all the way up to the spring to get water. He also found them planting boiled potatoes to save them time cooking them later. There were more examples of this, but I think you get the point. This also shows in that they asked Lucy to lift their invisibility without mentioning lifting their ugliness curse at the same time. The magician took her to another room where a luxurious meal appeared before her on the table, and as she ate, he told her the story of his workers. They had been like common dwarves before, but his so-called ugliness spell had turned them into monopods, meaning they still had their regular upper bodies, but they had only one large leg and an even larger foot, which made them jump instead of walk to get around. After this, Lucy went back to the others, finding the monopods happy to be visible again, although complaining to still be ugly. This is rather strange in my view, but Lucy then does her best to convince them that they are very nice looking as they are, and there's no mention of breaking the monopod curse to turn them back to their normal form. Instead, we get Reepicheep showing them how to use their one large foot as a boat and play around in the water with it, and somehow they are, at least temporarily, happy with their altered form. The magician then invites the crew of the Dawn Treader to a feast in his house that evening, where he told them of another Narnian ship having stopped there some years prior, from which he had met the lords Revillian, Argus, Mavramorn, and Roop, which made them conclude that the body they had found in the island with the golden pond must have been Lord Restamar. The magician also made a map for them of their journey so far, and magically repaired their ship from the serpent encounter. Chapter 6: Ramandu's Island. It was then smooth sailing for about 13 days, when they found an island in the distance with dark mountains. But as they got closer, they realized it wasn't an island at all, but a dark, thick mist. Here, most of them wanted to turn away, but Reepicheep wanted to investigate, and so the others felt brave enough to go ahead. And so they sailed into the thick darkness, until the only thing visible were the lanterns hanging on deck. There was complete silence apart from the rowing and creaking of the ship. A few minutes in, they heard a scream. It was a person begging them to take him aboard, which they did. The stranger was an old man with wild eyes, telling them that this was the land where dreams come alive. And not daydreams, just dreams. All kinds of dreams. With this revelation, everyone became fearful. They began rowing in a panic to get out of the darkness, but they went on for much longer than it had taken them to enter. Everyone also started hearing noises from their worst nightmares, which were different for everyone. They kept rowing, but there was no exit in sight. Then Lucy prayed to Aslan to help them, and shortly afterwards an albatross appeared and perched on their mast, gesturing where to go. It guided them out of the darkness, and Lucy was sure that it had been Aslan answering her prayer. Once out of danger, they learned that the man they had picked up from the dark waters was Lord Roop, although he was quite traumatized from his ordeal, having been stuck in the mist of dreams for 7 years. And when they were out of it, suddenly the mist had disappeared without a trace. They then continued sailing southeast for a while, until they noticed that the stars and constellations were different from the ones they knew back home in Narnia. Eventually, they found land again, like a burning silhouette in the sunset. Lucy also noticed an attractive smell from this land, saying it had a dim, purple-like smell, and Caspian agreed. They anchored in a shallow bay, and Lord Roop decided to stay on the ship, having no desire to investigate more unknown places, and who can blame him, honestly? It was too dark to go exploring far, but they found some ruins close to the shore. Here they found a table with a crimson cloth and a banquet richer than any before seen in Narnia. Then they found 3 figures sitting on one end of the table, and Reepicheep was the first to investigate. The figures were 3 men, but with hair and beards so long it completely covered their bodies. They appeared to be dead, but when Reepicheep felt the wrist of one of them, he reported that they were still warm and had a steady pulse. As they looked at them further, they saw their rings, finding that the figures were none other than the lords Revilian, Argus, and Mavramorn, the last of the 7 that Caspian was looking for. Now, the main group, meaning Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, Eustace, and Reepicheep, decided to stay the night in the ruins while the others went back to the ship, and so many hours went by without anything happening, until it was nearly dawn. Then a doorway was opened in a nearby hill. From the doorway came a tall girl with long blonde hair and a blue robe that left her arms bare. She carried a light and was the most beautiful girl anyone had ever seen. She asked them why they were at Aslan's table and didn't eat, to which they replied that they thought the food was cursed and would make them fall asleep like the 3 hairy lords. The tall girl then told them the story of what had happened. 7 years ago, the 3 lords had arrived at this island and found the table set with a banquet just like this. They had then started arguing, as one wanted to continue exploring, another wanted to return home to Narnia, hoping that King Miraz had died, and the third wanted to just stay there. Their argument went on to the extreme where one of them picked up a knife from the table. But it wasn't just any knife. It was a stone knife, and the very same one that the White Witch had once used to kill Aslan all those years ago. This is what cursed them into an enchanted sleep. They didn't even taste any of the food. After hearing this story, Reepicheep was the first to try the food, after which the rest followed. As they ate, the tall girl continued her story, telling them that this place was called World's End, although you could still travel further east beyond this. Caspian then asked how to break the sleeping enchantment that was on the 3 lords, to which the girl replied that her father would help them with that. Chapter 7: The End of the World. A door opened in the hillside, revealing an old man with silver hair and beard reaching all the way down to his feet. He and his daughter then started singing, welcoming the rising sun in the east. The old man then introduced himself as Ramandu, and this was his island, just on the edge of the world's end. You see, he was a star, or rather a retired star, one could say. He then told them that in order to break the enchanted sleep on the 3 lords, they would have to sail to the end of the world and leave one of their company there forever before returning. Now, this wasn't as difficult of a decision as one would think, as Reepicheep, the mouse, had set out on this journey with the goal of finding the end of the world, Aslan's country. And so he was quick to volunteer for this grand adventure, even if it meant never returning home. So the crew all ate their fill, now that they knew the food was harmless, and got ready to sail again. Lord Roop was then offered to stay on Ramandu's island in the meantime, and to be put in the same enchanted sleep as his friends while waiting for the others to return. And for some reason he happily accepted this. Given that his friends had been stuck like that for 7 years, I would think twice before agreeing to be put under the same enchantment as them. But maybe that's just me. And with that, the Dawn Treader set off east once again. Lucy was watching the water from the railing, and she saw the shadow of the ship on the bottom, about the size of a shoe, so the water was unnaturally clear for being so deep. Later on, they also saw a glimpse of sea people, as in mer-people, and their kingdom. They sailed like this for days until one point when Reepicheep went overboard. Not because he fell, oh no, he had interpreted one of the sea people's movements as a challenge and decided to take them on. But then he had realized something odd. The seawater was sweet, not salty. So Caspian got a bucket to fetch some water for them, after rescuing Reepicheep, of course, and they all had a taste. They realized that not only was the water sweet, it was so invigorating that they didn't need any food. Drinking the water also made it easier for them to be in the increasing light around this place, as the sun was now 3 times larger than before. On they sailed for a few days, and the Dawn Treader glided smoothly on waveless water. They realized that they had to be in a current of sorts, which steadily took them eastward. By sustaining themselves with seawater, they didn't need any food or even sleep, and they were all in a constant state of silent joy and excitement. Eventually, they reached a part of the sea that was covered in blooming lilies. They named it the Silver Sea and continued gliding through the lilies for several days. As they went, the sea became shallower, and they finally reached a point where they had to stop to save the ship from grounding. Here it was time to bid farewell to Reepicheep, and Caspian suddenly declared that he wanted to go with him. An argument ensued where the others tried to reason with him. He was King of Narnia, not a private person who's free to pursue adventures. He had a duty to his people. So Caspian then went to his cabin in frustration, where he had a vision of Aslan, confirming that he had to return home, but also telling him that Lucy, Edmund, and Eustace had to go with Reepicheep. So he calmed down and let the others know of his vision, and so the children and the mouse left the Dawn Treader in the boat. The crew then went back to Ramandu's island, where they found Lord Roop and his 3 companions awoken from their enchantment. Then Caspian asked for the tall, beautiful girl's hand in marriage, the daughter of a star, and she became his queen, and they had children and grandchildren who went on to become great kings of Narnia. But what of the party that left at the end of the world? Well, they went on in their boat for 3 more days until they reached a wall of water, almost like a giant wave endlessly fixed in one place. Through it, they could see something like mountains, warm and green, but outside of this world. Here they bid farewell to Reepicheep, who continued alone in his own little boat. The children watched as he floated up the water wall and disappeared from view, never to be heard from again. The children then continued south along the wall until they reached a patch of grass. Here they were met by Aslan in the shape of a lamb, and he invited them to breakfast. He then revealed his true lion form and opened a portal for them to return to their homeworld, and he told Edmund and Lucy that they won't return to Narnia ever again. This made Lucy upset, and she asked whether it was the same for Eustace, to which he didn't have a clear response. So they entered through the portal, once again finding themselves in the bedroom in Eustace's parents' house, the only difference being that Eustace had now changed for the better. The end. My thoughts. Growing up, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader was one of my favorites. It has a quality to it where it keeps you intrigued throughout the story because you have no idea where the story will go next. A bit like an Odyssey, but for children, exploring the unexplored parts of the Narnian seas, finding new and mysterious kinds of magic. And some of it is quite dark as well. I remember feeling deeply disturbed as a child by the unfortunate Lord, I think it was Lord Restamar, who was turned into solid gold for simply going into a pool of water, doomed to forever rest at the bottom like a life-size statue. I don't know, it made me feel really uneasy somehow. And then you have the Dark Mist, which I'm not actually sure covered an island or it was just covering a patch of the sea, but regardless, we never get to explore the horrors of what actually happens there, and that is a good thing in my opinion. Having the crew just rescuing Lord Roop and finding out that the place they had just reached is one where all of your dreams come to life, you don't actually need a manifestation of this to feel a sense of urgency. As a reader, you immediately start thinking about the worst things you've ever dreamed and how much you'd rather not have that come to life and chase you. And then we have Eustace. As a child, I very much enjoyed his development from this annoying bully to, a normal, kind person. I just love Eustace. He holds a special place in my heart. And I honestly think this holds up as the most wholesome part of this entire book. Because the one thing it is sort of lacking is character intrigue and development. There aren't really any conflicts or proper development of the other main characters. Aside from perhaps that Lucy is jealous of her older sister's good looks, but then she's confronted by Aslan about this. She doesn't get over it by her own insight. And then there's that small event at the very end where Caspian wants to continue his adventure further east, where there's no return, and his friends and crew try to talk him out of it. Again, Aslan's intervention is the thing that makes him see reason. And personally, I would have preferred that these characters had some agency of their own and to come to their own realizations, but then that would take away from the obvious religious themes that is prevalent throughout this series. So we kind of just have to accept it for what it is. Overall, this book is a delightful adventure and it still holds up today in my view. I really like it and would rank it among my favorites in the whole series. And now I want to know what all of you think, so do leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also, if you've made it this far into the video, I would very much appreciate if you'd leave a like as well, as that lets me know how many of you actually enjoyed the video, which is very helpful. And it makes me happy. And also, don't forget to subscribe if you want to get notified when I release the next video. As the next one in the series is The Silver Chair, which is absolutely amazing. I would highly recommend that you subscribe as you don't want to miss that one. Thank you all so much for watching or listening today, and I hope to see you back in my next video.